They cast the rejected Omega bride into the snow, until the banished Alpha King took her hand. Lena did not cry when they walked her to the gate. She thought she would. She had expected tears, the kind that come when something too large to understand finally lands. But her eyes stayed dry, and her hands stayed still, and the only thing she felt was the cold. Cold stone under her bare feet. Cold air against her arms. Cold silence from every single person who watched her go. The ceremony had lasted less than 10 minutes. Her whole life, rearranged in 10 minutes. She had dressed carefully that morning. Her mother had helped her braid her dark hair, winding it close to her head the way she always did for important occasions. They had not spoken much. Her mother was not a woman of many words, and Lena had learned early that silence from her mother meant things were fine. That morning, she understood it meant something else. But she did not ask. She was good at not asking. The Aldrich family hall was full of people from both packs. Candles burned in long iron holders. The elder council stood at the front in their dark coats. Kane stood in the center of it all, tall, broad-shouldered, his jaw set in the way of a man who had already decided something and was simply waiting for the right moment to say it. He looked at her when she walked in. Actually looked at her, which surprised her, because in the 2 years of their arrangement, he had rarely looked at her directly. She had told herself it meant nothing. That powerful men were busy. That attention would come later. It came then. And it came as 4 words. "I reject you," he said. Loud. Clear. The way a man announces a decision he is not ashamed of. "You are not what this pack needs. You are not what I need." The hall went completely quiet. Lena stood still. She waited for someone to speak. For her father to step forward. For one of the elders to intervene. For anything to happen that was not this. Nothing happened. Her father looked at his shoes. Her mother had already turned her face toward the wall. The elders moved forward, not to help her, but to complete the process. They removed the small pack sigil from the cord at her wrist, a simple act, done without anger, which made it somehow worse than anger would have been. Then the 2 men near the door opened it, and the night air came rushing in, and that was that. She walked. She kept walking. The snow started somewhere around the second field, light at first, then heavier. She had no coat. She had no shoes. She had the dress she had worn to her own rejection and nothing else. She told herself she would feel the cold properly soon. She told herself a lot of things that night. After a long time, she fell. She did not feel herself fall. One moment she was walking, and the next she was on the ground, her cheek against the snow, her hands not responding the way she asked them to. She thought, in a very calm and distant way, that this might be where her story ended. In a field. In the snow. After 10 minutes of ceremony. She closed her eyes. The man who found her was not looking for anyone. Aaron Maddox walked the same boundary line every night, not because he expected trouble, but because 3 years of exile had left him with the habits of a man who could not fully let go of the instinct to protect a perimeter. The land he walked was not his territory. It belonged to no one. That was precisely why he had chosen it. He saw her from 30 feet away. A dark shape against the white that should not have been there. He did not hesitate. He crossed to her, checked that she was breathing, and picked her up. She weighed less than made sense for someone her height. Her hands were ice cold. Her feet were worse. He moved quickly but carefully, quickly because of the cold, carefully because something about her stillness told him she had already been handled without care, and he did not want to add to that. His cabin was small and warm. A single room with a fireplace, a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves of books along the far wall. He had built it himself over the course of a winter, learning as he went, fixing his mistakes with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. He put her near the fire. He covered her with blankets. He checked her hands and feet again with the focused calm of someone who had treated injuries in worse conditions than this. He boiled water. He waited. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting at the table reading. He had positioned himself there deliberately, far enough to give her room, close enough to hear if she needed something. He did not look up immediately. He wanted her to wake without feeling watched. She looked around the room slowly. Then she looked at him. "You are safe," he said, without looking up from his book. "No one knows you are here." She said nothing for a long time. He did not fill the silence. Outside, the snow was still falling. Eventually, she said, "Thank you." He looked up then. She was sitting up, the blanket around her shoulders, her dark braided hair half undone. Her eyes were hazel, and they were looking at him with the careful, measuring attention of someone who had learned not to trust quickly. "Rest more," he said. "We can talk later." They talked on the third day. Not much, at first. She asked if she could help with anything. She seemed uncomfortable sitting still while someone else worked. He gave her simple tasks. She did them well and quietly. By the fourth morning she had reorganized his bookshelves by subject, which he had not asked her to do, and which he found he did not mind at all. "What is your name?" she asked, on the fourth evening. "Aaron," he said. "Lena," she replied. That was enough for then. She learned who he was gradually, the way you learn anything real, not all at once, but in pieces. A word here. A story there. One evening he told her about the council vote. About the bloodline he had refused to have removed. About the morning they told him he was no longer a king, and he had simply nodded and asked for time to pack his books. She listened to all of it without changing her expression. "They called it treason," he said. "Protecting people who could not protect themselves." "That does not sound like treason," she said. "That sounds like the only reasonable thing to do." He was quiet for a moment. It was the first time in 3 years that someone had said that to him. He had thought it himself, many times. But hearing it from someone else did something different. "What happened to you?" he asked. He had waited to ask. He had learned that people tell you what they are ready to tell you, and pushing only teaches them to keep more hidden. She told him. All of it. The ceremony. The 4 words. Her father's shoes. The gate. The snow. When she finished, the fire was the only sound in the room. "I am sorry," he said. "Do not be," she said. "You did not do it." She paused. "I think I needed to leave anyway. I just did not know how to leave on my own." Spring came slowly. The snow pulled back from the fields a little each week. Lena began to walk further each day, first around the cabin, then to the tree line, then beyond it. One afternoon she followed a path she had not noticed before and came out into a small village she had not known existed. It was nothing like the pack settlements she had grown up near. There were no strict ranks here. No formal greetings based on status. Children played in the mud without anyone organizing them by bloodline. People spoke to each other across fences like equals, because they were. She learned that most of them had come here the same way she had, sideways, unexpectedly, after a door somewhere else had closed. There were women who had left arranged matches. Men who had refused pack orders they believed were wrong. A few humans who simply lived here because the land was affordable and the neighbors were kind. A young girl named Yeva found Lena on her second visit. Yeva was 15 and serious-faced, with the look of someone carrying a worry too large for her age. She told Lena, in very few words, that her family had received an offer from a neighboring pack. That she was the offer. Lena sat with her for 2 hours. She did not tell Yeva what to do. She explained, slowly and clearly, what options actually existed. She told her about laws she had looked up in Aaron's books. She told her, finally and plainly, that a person's value is not something another person gets to set. Walking back to the cabin that evening, Lena noticed something different about herself. Something had shifted, not loudly, not all at once. But she had spoken that afternoon with a certainty she had not had before. As if the words had always been inside her and had simply been waiting for the right reason to come out. Aaron noticed the change too. He said nothing about it, but she caught him watching her sometimes, not in the way that made her uncomfortable, but in the way of someone who is watching a thing become more fully itself. One morning she left wildflowers on his desk. She had noticed a pressed flower in the back pages of one of his books, dried carefully, placed there with intention, and it had told her something about him that he had not said in words. She did not mention the flowers. He did not mention them either. But they stayed on his desk for a very long time. The trouble came in the way trouble usually comes, quietly at first, then all at once. A man arrived at the village border one afternoon with a formal letter from the Elder Council. The letter informed the residents that all unmated Omega women were to be returned to their origin packs within 30 days, for their own safety and welfare. It used careful language. The kind of language that sounds like concern but means control. The village gathered that evening. People were frightened. Yeva sat in the back corner with her hands folded tight in her lap. Older women who had built homes here sat straight in their chairs, but their eyes were afraid. Lena stood up. She had not planned to. She had not prepared a speech. She simply stood up, and the room went quiet, and she began to speak. I know what this letter says, she told them. I also know what it means. I was told something very similar once, that something was happening for my benefit. That it was arranged because people cared about my future. She paused. They walked me to the gate and locked it behind me. That was the last thing they did for my benefit. The room stayed quiet. She kept going. This letter is not about safety. It is about putting people back in places where they are easier to manage. But you are not here by accident. You built something here. And you have more right to stay than any council has to remove you. When she sat down, the woman beside her put a hand on her arm and squeezed once, briefly. That was all. But it was enough. Aaron had been standing at the back of the room. He had arrived quietly, not wanting to draw attention. He had listened to everything. And in the way that very decisive people sometimes make decisions, not with drama, but with a sudden and complete certainty, he made one. He sent word to the remaining pack elders across the northern reaches, invoking a law that predated the council's formation by over 200 years. It was a law that allowed an alpha king to request a direct vote of legitimacy from the assembled packs, bypassing the council entirely. The council had counted on everyone forgetting this law existed. Most people had. Aaron had not. Before they left for the northern capital, he and Lena sat at the table after dinner, the way they had sat many evenings, with tea going cold between them and the fire keeping them company. You do not have to come, he said. I know, she said. A moment passed. I am coming, she added. He looked at her across the table. She was looking back at him with that same careful, clear attention she had had since the first morning she woke up in his cabin. He had come to understand, in the months since, that this was simply how she looked at things she had decided were worth looking at properly. All right, he said. The journey to the northern capital took 3 days. The capital was everything the borderlands were not: formal, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, full of people performing the correct version of themselves. Aaron moved through it with the ease of someone who had once lived here, and the distance of someone who was glad he no longer did. The hearing was held in a large stone chamber. Representatives from 17 packs sat in rows. The Elder Council occupied the raised seats at the front, their faces carefully neutral. The lead council member, a tall woman with silver hair and no warmth in her expression, opened by questioning whether Aaron's years of exile had made him unfit for any leadership role. She used words like unstable and irregular. She referenced his decision to protect the condemned bloodline as evidence of poor judgment. Aaron let her finish. Then he rose and addressed the assembled packs, not the council. He was calm. He had documents. He had witnesses, including 2 members of the bloodline he had protected, now grown adults who stood and spoke in clear, simple terms about what their lives had become and what would have been lost if the order had been carried out. When a council member interrupted to question Lena's presence, calling her a cast-off Omega with no standing in these proceedings, Aaron turned toward the men with an expression that was not angry, which was somehow more commanding than anger. She read the council's letter, Aaron said, and found in it a law the council had hoped no one would cite. The law I am using today to stand in this room. If you are wondering what her standing is, she is the reason this hearing is happening at all. The chamber was quiet. The vote was called shortly after. Of 17 packs, 12 voted to restore Aaron's title and nullify the council's banishment order. The order against the borderland village was dissolved. The council retained its advisory role, nothing more. It was not a dramatic victory. There was no celebration in the chamber. People filed out the way people leave any formal meeting, putting on their coats, nodding to one another, speaking in low voices. But outside, in the cold gray light of the afternoon, Aaron stopped walking and turned to face her. "Thank you," he said. "You did the work," she replied. "Some of it," he said. And that was all he said. But it was the right amount. They went back to the borderlands. Not to a palace. Not to a grand estate. Back to the village that had grown into something warm and real, and back to the small cabin where everything had begun. The village celebrated, modestly, genuinely, with food and fire and children underfoot. 3 weeks later, Lena's father came alone. He stood at the edge of the village and waited. He did not send word ahead. He simply appeared, wearing the expression of a man who has rehearsed something and is no longer sure it is adequate. She walked to him. She did not make it easy, because it had not been easy. She told him what his silence had cost her. She told him plainly, without cruelty, the way you tell hard truths to someone you have decided deserves honesty more than they deserve comfort. He listened. He did not argue. He did not make excuses. At the end, he said he was sorry, not in the way people say it to close a conversation, but in the slow, careful way of someone who understands it does not fix anything, and who is saying it anyway because it is true. She did not forgive him all at once. Forgiveness, she had come to understand, was not a door you walked through and closed behind you. It was something you returned to, again and again, choosing it slowly over time. She told him she would think about what came next. He nodded. He left. She stood for a while in the path where he had been, looking at nothing in particular. Aaron was in the garden when she came back, patching a section of fence that had broken in last week's wind. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and then he kept working, because he understood that she would speak when she was ready and that the best thing he could do in the meantime was simply be nearby. She sat on the low stone wall and watched him work. "He came," she said. "I know," Aaron said. "I saw. I did not make it easy for him." "Good." She almost smiled. Almost. She looked out across the village, the small houses with their lit windows, the paths worn smooth by people who came and went and came back again, the sound of someone's child calling out across a yard in the last light of the evening. She had been here before, in a way. Standing in the cold, looking at a world that did not have a place for her. Waiting to be told where she belonged. The difference now was that she was not waiting. She had helped build this. These paths, this community, this particular kind of quiet that was not emptiness but fullness, she had had a hand in all of it. Her voice had kept Yeva here. Her discovery had brought Aaron back to a purpose he had stopped believing he deserved. Her willingness to keep walking on the worst night of her life had led her, improbably and completely, to here. Aaron finished with the fence and came to stand beside her. He did not reach for her hand all at once, he simply stood close, the way he had stood close from the very beginning, present without pressure. After a moment, his hand found hers on the stone wall. His fingers were warm. She did not look at him. She kept looking at the village. "They threw me away," she said. "They actually threw me away." "I know," he said. "And look." She gestured, at the village, at the lit windows, at all of it. He looked. He understood. They sat there for a long time, in the quiet of a life they had not planned but had built carefully, together, out of the materials that remained after everything else had been taken. The evening came in around them, unhurried. The stars began to show themselves one at a time, the way they always do, slowly at first, and then, quite suddenly, all at once. She had been cast out to disappear. Instead, without anyone's permission, she had taken root.